Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting guest in a super interesting subject. It's proof, right? The data is out there. It's in many, many studies. B2B CMOs fail quickly. The average tenure is around 18 months. It's about half that of CEOs. It's the shortest tenure in the C-suite. So what that means, as senior marketing executives, chances are we're going to be looking for a job. We're going to be looking for what's the next progression in our career path. And when we do that, as much as those companies are going to be interviewing us, we need to be interviewing those companies. We need to be thinking about how are we strategically making the right move and joining an organization that is deeply aligned with our beliefs, and really the role of the CMO and what that position does and how it adds value to the organization. So Jill, that's a big subject, right?
Absolutely.
Not one that's really well covered or talked about. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today. But you're a two-time B2B CMO. You've got over 10 years of senior marketing experience. Maybe just start us off and tell us a little bit about, your background and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve. I'm really excited to be here. Love talking all things marketing and happy to help wherever I can. So, have over 25 years of marketing experience. I'm probably one of the rare breed that actually has a degree in marketing, but a degree back then in marketing was not what marketing is today when you think about all the advancements and the evolution of digital marketing and social media and all the technology that has developed. And I think that evolution is probably what has, kept me curious and excited about a role in marketing, so that as you're kind of growing up in your career and you're doing different things. I've had the luxury of being with phenomenal leaders over the time that have given me a lot of autonomy to learn new tools, to learn new things, to kind of tap into my sales hat or tap into a customer success sort of hat. And I think when you start to combine all of that, that's really been a major driver behind my success as a marketer. And then, that personal curiosity that keeps driving you forward. So, yeah, I'm super excited to be here, talk more about kind of the future of marketing and how do we get aligned and where do we go from here?
I mean, I love that. That's a good kind of kickoff, right? That, how do we get aligned, right? We talk a lot about alignment between marketing and sales, but what I think you're going to talk about here today a lot is that alignment between you and the company that you're joining, right? Now, I talk to a lot of CMOs, and I talk to a lot of CMOs that are they're trying to kind of push forward a point of view in a very, very sales centric, C-suite, right? And there has to be that. We all have to have our mindset on revenue. We're very, deep penetration into the pipeline. But your CMOs, they've got quotas, over their head. The CEOs, they're reporting to the board. It's all about performance. And so there's no doubt why there needs to be, a very, very focus on the short term. But there is a longer term perspective as well that a CMO has to have, right? And if companies don't have that, maybe it isn't the best alignment when you're looking for your next job. But tell me, if you were looking for a position right now, what would be the kinds of things that you would want to judge the companies that are looking to hire you and bring you on as a CMO?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, a lot of conversations are being had just in networking, talking to other peers in B2B, marketing. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of us struggle with the same things. And that is sort of that alignment, right? And you talked about alignment with sales. That's only a piece of it. But I think what I personally am looking for, and what I think a lot of, senior marketers are looking for, is alignment in belief of what's the go-to-market strategy? How are we looking at revenue generation at these companies, right? And I think there's a lot of, commentary out there today about, quote, demand gen. And demand gen is a risky word, right? And I think you and I have talked about that in the past too. But, the alignment really comes down to what drives that overall demand. How do you look at it as a business? And what does that mean for go-to-market motions, right? You have a marketing piece of that. You have a sales piece of that. You might have channels and alliances as a piece of that. But then how do you get, like, what's the view? And is it one view, right? We are one revenue generating company. We all work hand in hand. Or what is marketing doing for me today? Personally, I want a company that's looking for one view. And then I can help from my marketing perspective, also from just my experience that I've gained over the last 25 years of where else can marketing help? What other touch points, what other teams, functions, etc., are influential in building revenue? And so I think that alignment, that word alignment, it's much broader than sales and marketing, which of course we all know and understand today.
Yeah, because you can get very easily steeped in a mountain of marketing tactics, right? And
Oh, yes.
with requests from sales and customer success and the CEO, and we've got this event that's coming up, we got to run for that, we haven't gotten the ebook out. It's very easy just to kind of get lost in the sea of things that have to get done. But what you're talking about is playing a larger strategic role in the company, right?
For sure. For sure.
And here's one thing I wanted to ask you on that, because this is something I found throughout my career as well. But the highest voice of authority in a company is always the customer, right? So if we do things that are right for the customer, we do things that are right for revenue for the business. That's typically the alignment there. Yet companies get very, very familiar with their customers, but that deep understanding, I think, puts the CMO at the seat at the table that represents the voice of highest authority. So when you're talking about a strategic go-to-market strategy, what's your point of view in terms of like that understanding the customer, that deep, deep understanding of what their problems, what their needs are, and how does that impact that go-to-market strategy that you're talking about?
Huge, right? Like marketing should be talking to the customer. And I've been a part of organizations in the past that was, where sales was like, no way, you're not talking to my customer. And that already shows misalignment, right? To your point, right? We need to understand what that voice is. How do customers find us? What do they find, valuable about what we are providing? What communities are they a part of? Where do they get their information? What problems are we solving? All of that information and probably so much more, right, is what is going to drive marketing from a demand gen, right? If I use that word loosely, from a content communication, storytelling, right, narrative build, that should be the driver.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Gartner's talked about it as CMOs need to be more, chief customer officers these days, and really understanding that. So you just approached another subject there, right? And I know you talk about content, and one of the very first times that we met, you said, I'm very much content focused, content first, right? So tell me why you're content first, and then tell me about how that plays into alignment with, if you're a CMO looking for a company to land in the next evolution of your career, why content and that alignment is important.
Yeah. Well, kind of, a good marketer is also very data driven. So we can't let that slide, right? I think a lot of people misunderstand that there's a lot of data in the marketing world. When you kind of take that approach, there's some statistic out there, and I forget who said it, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3% of your total addressable market is in buying mode, actively looking for a solution. That means that upwards of 95% of the market doesn't even know that there's a solution to a problem that they may have. They may not even know they have a problem. So to me, right, that is the epitome of marketing, finding out how to tap into that 95%. The low hanging fruit is the 2-3% that are already looking for your solution. They're already in the SEO, the PPC, they're actively looking. But how do you go after that broader market? It's through content. So getting that back to why that's important to me, I don't, when you're interviewing a company, you want to know that they understand that just as much as you, and that they're backing that kind of content first communication style, that they understand that storytelling and the narrative is super important to the future demand that your company is going to be able to drive. It's all about awareness.
And what's so important about what you're saying here is that the the misalignment that I've seen with the marketing function and the C-suite in the company is that they're believers in content, but they're believers first and foremost in content and product marketing, right? Which is
Yes,
super important, especially when you get to that 5% that's in market, that's ready to buy. We have to have that nailed. Absolutely.
100%. Yep.
But product marketing isn't what's going to spark the conversation with that other 95%.
Correct. Correct. And I think that's where I don't want to keep using the word alignment or misalignment, but maybe misunderstanding that, yes, I would say the majority of the C-suite understands value of content. But what does that mean from a broader perspective? Because they're going to expect that there is a return on that content.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you measure that is where it gets tricky, right? And figuring out what the actual outcomes are. And that's where that challenge comes in. But when you're going after the 95%, you need, having a good reputation is important. Being able to talk with experience and expertise, that's that product side, that's super important. Mm-hmm. And you need to have authority, right? Like you have to be believable
right.
with all of this, right? That you have a reason to have a point of view in the market.
And, everybody believes in like webinars and like this, this high level thought leadership content and bringing panels of experts together, right? And formulating and validating that opinion that you have as a company and everything. But because it's a well-known tactic, it's usually not something that, the rest of the C-suite's going to say, why are we doing something like this? But when you're talking about addressing 95% of the market, you're talking about using a lot of marketing's resources
Mm-hmm.
to have an ongoing, ever-present thought leadership, strategy for the business. Now that, and rationalizing that and sitting down with your CFO and saying, here, we're going to do that, that's a different story, right? But
right.
you talked a lot about, a data-driven kind of CMO. Like, how do you, from a data perspective, think about that thought leadership content, that 95% of the market that we need to create that kind of awareness with? Because that does short circuit conversations that sales are going to have, right? They're not having to build the expertise and the reputation of the company and then or therefore the stature in the industry as part of the sales process. They can leapfrog that. And it helps position them as thought leaders too. So how do you align with the rest of the C-suite, your CFO, your CEO, CRO on that thought leadership strategy? How do you?
Well, I think if that alignment's not there from the start, it's probably never going to be there. I have found that that's a constant struggle, that if you don't come into an organization with that same understanding of how do I approach marketing as a CMO? What's important to me to building that, kind of long tenure from a pipeline generation or revenue perspective. You do have short-term and long-term tactics. The short-term stuff is probably the things you already know from all of the data that's working. Certain number of dollars in PPC or paid ads or organic, right? The stuff we all kind of know and use, it's bread and butter. You've got to understand that to the point where it's sort of just an ongoing engine and you're not continually testing and massaging, right? Where all the testing and the massaging and the energy I put in is on the content side and figuring out what are those themes that we want to be talking about, that we have a reputation, that we have authority, that we have expertise in, and how do you bring that forward to drive demand? The metrics on those two things have to be different. But as many organizations and many CMOs struggle with, it is really hard to measure the unquantifiable, the content piece, right? You can look at views, you can look at impressions, but none of that is really going to help you kind of get the CFO's attention. So, there's a lot of, I think you naturally going back to having that conversation with the customer, you need to ask the customer, how did you hear about us? They're going to tell you, oh, I saw a podcast, I went to your website, then I filled out a form, or I met you at an event and then I signed up for your podcast and then I filled out a form. So like that whole notion of, attribution, it's skewed. And I always tell, leadership teams that I've worked with, the sales teams, my own marketing teams, right? you got to use the data for what it's worth, but then you also have to apply some common sense. We all are consumers. We may not be buying B2B technology. I mean, maybe in the marketing side we are, but just think about how you shop for anything. You might see a piece of clothing on a friend. You're like, oh, I really like those sneakers. Where did you get those? Or what are they? And you're like, oh, mental note. You forget about it. A couple of weeks goes by and you're like, oh, what were those sneakers? You start Googling around this, then you're getting ads, and then you maybe bump into somebody else and you're like, oh, I just saw those shoes on a friend's. Like, remind me, where did you get those? Next thing you know, you're going to that website.
Right.
It is the
Right.
same exact thing in the B2B world. So
It is.
being in all of those places, having that conversation, the reputation, it's all influential.
So what you're telling me here is I'm thinking of this in terms of like the theme of this episode here, in terms of how you're interviewing really the companies that you're and the
Yep.
alignment with that company, right? You got to not only be a good storyteller as a marketer to your audiences, but I think you got to be a good storyteller to the rest of the C-suite about the impact and the role of marketing and what it can do beyond, oh, you guys need more case studies, we can do that. You need some more data sheets, one sheet, we can do that, right? We're planning the next event, like the functional role of the CMO.
Yep.
You're telling a story here that's much broader than that. And if that story doesn't resonate with that company that you're interviewing with, that's where red flags start to go up.
Right. I mean, there's key questions you can be asking every single one of the stakeholders that you're meeting with. How do you view marketing? Right. And then you can see if that aligns with you, or how, maybe just takes your, helps with the conversation. What challenges are they facing in their function? Marketing may have input or impact on that. Even HR, right? Maybe they're having hiring problems. Well, why are they having hiring problems?
Right.
Maybe they have, not enough social presence. Maybe they don't talk about their culture enough. Maybe, who knows, right? You can help. And it's really just about, how can I help you do your job? And I think that that's an important piece. We all get caught up in, metrics, sales, revenue, what portion of pipeline should come from marketing. Sure, those are all important questions. But at the end of the day, if you really want to be aligned with the rest of the leadership team, you've got to figure out what is important to each one of them and how do they view marketing in relation to that.
I had a two-time CEO on that was answering the question of what do CEOs want from their CMOs. He used to be a CMO. That's not always there's not a lot of CMOs that make it into the CEO role. So it's a really unique perspective. And he said, here's all I want from a CMO. I want them to add value to my company. Right. And I think you were talking about what questions you can ask, right, of the CEO, the CRO, that you're interviewing with for that position. How do you want marketing to add value to the company?
It's a perfect question.
What a great question, right?
And I will tell you, I think people have trouble, right? Outside of pipeline. Like, I want, if you're a CRO, you're like, I need pipeline. I need my sales team to have, leads to follow up. Of course.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that's also not taking into effect or into an account what marketing can do for the base of customers. You want to talk about retention. We have great influence on retention. It's not just about new logo. You want to talk about cross-sell. So customer marketing is just as important as new logo or bringing in new accounts into a business. And so hopefully, as you're having these conversations, you start to uncover, maybe it's aha moments, not just for yourself, but for those other individuals within the business that you might be considering joining. Because you don't want to get in there and then 6 months later, you're like, oh, we're not really on the same page. You have a real struggle.
So you want to understand that alignment before you accept the job, right? Because,
for sure.
Because creating alignment where that bridge is broken already is going to be much harder to do. And I love the idea that these questions that you're asking them, because in their answers, you can also ask the question, what about if marketing did this? what if marketing, right? What if marketing help, on the land and expand, right? That
Hmm.
should be a significant portion of our, if we're all CRO, CMO, chief customer officer, if we're all revenue focused, revenue
Yep.
is going to come in a significant way, new revenue from our existing
Yep.
client base. That's a really important question that you brought up there to ask, and whether or not
Definitely.
they see value in marketing's role in terms of doing that,
And
because
that goes
it's
back to,
important.
right, like if you are a siloed organization and you're only saying marketing, I want you to drive 50% of new logo revenue, you've now just thrown everything you just said, Steve, out the window, because
Yeah,
now marketing is like, you only want us to focus on this.
right.
What about the impact? Because no matter what marketing does, right, out in the market, you're influencing a variety of stakeholders, from employees and future employees to investors to analysts to, new logo opportunities. But there's no way in a content first approach that you are strictly talking to one of those audiences. Maybe the content that you're putting out there is geared towards one or the other, but you can't guarantee that only that audience is seeing it. So you are influencing.
Right, right. You know, this is a question I ask all the time on this podcast, and content has been a very, very large part of the conversation here. If you could just put a rating from 1 to 10 on the importance of content to the overall growth and success of the business, 1, not important at all. 10, it's actually vital to the overall growth and success of the business. Where would you rate it, just to give kind of a frame of reference here?
Yeah. 10.
10.
10. You could do all the traditional lead generation that you want, but if you don't have those three things that I talked about earlier, like the reputation, the expertise, the authority that is all built through content, your conversion to win or close is going to be very minimal. You want to be at the top of your game, right? Like you're touting from the rooftops, not necessarily about just product,
Right.
but you want your leadership to be showcasing their expertise, so that when sales is or when they're talking to prospects have already met right in the virtual world, right? Your leadership, your thoughtfulness, your understanding of their problems and how to solve for it, so by the time they're having a conversation with sales, they're already made up their decision.
Right. Right. And by the time they want to have a conversation with sales, they're already 70% of the way through the research, the development
Yep.
process. And the trend is, I was at a sales conference last week, and they put up a big stat by Gartner, and it's all about that they want a self-serve. That's the trend, a
Mm-hmm.
self-serve buying environment, right? We're talking
Yep.
about B2B, right? So the trend is that they're making more and more of their decisions from the content. And
Yep.
it's content that's helping them, educating, advising them in their job, giving different perspectives, helping them to mitigate risks, right? This isn't about future benefit, right? So that kind of content, I agree with you. 10 and 10 is super important.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we were going to wrap this up, and you were going to like list for me the top deal breakers in a company that wanted you to come on as their CMO,
Mm-hmm.
but you're judging them, right? This is your career. This is what you're going to be doing significant portion of your life, right?
Yep.
What are the deal breakers?
I would say it's pretty obvious in the first couple of conversations. If the only conversation you're having is around metrics and pipeline, that is likely a deal breaker, because that means there's no understanding for the broader, achievements that marketing can bring in or influence on other companies. On the flip side of that, I've had conversations where people are super excited about, the idea of being able to build the awareness around their company. And so I would say that a deal breaker is just metrics. A deal breaker is you're only measured on those metrics. I would say that's number one on my list. I don't even know if the list goes beyond that, to tell you the truth. There's always things like culture and alignment. I'm a natural born people person. I have like spidey senses that go off around personalities. I think that's something you can't measure, but I do
Right.
think that it's important, you know, when you talk, you know, we started this conversation around alignment. If you don't have natural rapport on a first conversation, second conversation, just that thing called chemistry, right? That you can just have an open, free flow of conversation. I also think that's a red flag, right? Maybe number two.
I would agree that, the best job in the world can be the worst job in the world, depending on the people that you work with. Um,
Hmm.
all right. So this is the last question. All right. Here we
Okay.
go. If you got a job as a new CMO and you wanted to set expectations, what do you want to be judged by?
That's a great question, actually. Um, Obviously, there's going to be a financial aspect of that.
Mhm.
I think when I think about marketing today, and I've been doing a lot of thinking on this over the last several months, just thinking about how do you better align. There's got to be another word for that, Steve. How do you really, you know, make sure you're all on the same page? And I really think about marketing in three kind of areas. You have to create the demand, so that creation aspect. What is the measurement there? Then you're capturing the demand. That's your natural, right? Like leads, MQL, sales, right? And then you have to convert that to closed won deals. That's your revenue and, you know, your bookings. So I think in the kind of natural path of those three areas, I think that it's important to make sure you have agreed upon goals for each one of those areas. And the first one being the hardest to measure, but that's where the voice of the customer and getting
Mhm.
feedback and all of that is really going to help you, you know, get the buy-in from other senior leaders within your company, and a way to maybe quantify it a bit outside of things like impressions and views and visits and that sort of, you know, those sort of metrics.
It makes really good sense. I mean, there's so much to consider. There's so much complexity and I've had CEOs say that they think that the CMO job is the hardest job on the C-suite,
I would agree with
unsolicited,
that.
right? I'm like, great, give me a freaking break a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Listen, right? But so knowing that that's the environment that the modern CMO today is coming into, what's the takeaway that you're going to leave with the CMO community that's watching this today? What's the one thing that out of this entire discussion that we've had that you would want them to take away?
Yeah. I think it goes back to asking questions, right? And open communication. If you're in a CMO role, have those conversations with the other leaders around the table, in that what do they want from marketing? What challenges are they trying to solve? And if you can help even with the smallest of challenges, it really does help build confidence in what marketing is trying to do long term. I also think that, you know, just understanding that kind of does play into, we are one revenue generating company and we all have challenges. If we all work together and we have open communication, we're more likely to be successful in meeting those challenges. But if you continue to work in those siloed manners and it's just team against team, we're not going to be successful, and
Right.
like short term or long term.
To accentuate your point, I spoke with a CMO that was an analyst at Forrester, and she used to go in as the sales consultant with another woman who was the marketing consultant. And she said within the first hour of consulting with the company, we would know whether they were going to be successful or not. And it was whether the
Interesting.
two saw value in each other's role.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about that alignment word again, right? And that constant communication, that meant that there was teamwork there, right? If they saw value in the other's role, that meant that they saw value in how they were going to be working together. And
Yeah.
so I think that's basically what you're saying, right? And that constant communication, because it can't be, when I talk and they talk about success and that alignment, right? Everyone's talking about regular meetings and not being afraid to ask the questions of what's not working,
Mm-hmm.
because not we don't have a batting average of 1,000 as CMOs, right? So not, and we want to experiment, and
Right.
so I think that that constant alignment, that constant conversation, right, is super important that you bring that up as kind of a takeaway here. Jill, if there
Absolutely.
was, I know there's a million more questions that we could ask, but if there was questions that the audience had that they wanted to get a hold of you, where's the best place? Is it like provide your LinkedIn profile, a link to that?
LinkedIn. Yeah,
Okay,
I would say reach out, LinkedIn, message me, you know, that's probably the best way.
fantastic. Well, we'll put that up as this goes up and a direct link to you there. And just thank you for coming in and taking on a subject that maybe isn't the most popular subject to talk about, right? But one that's obviously very important. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, Steve. Thank you.